In this lesson, I want to cover off the for loop. So this is going to be a way to actually loop through, probably one of the best ways to loop through some data. And I've brought back an array, I've brought back an object, and we're going to see how useful it is when we're able to loop through all of these values and output them. So we've got our array first, and if we want to loop through all of these items in the array, we can really easily do that. So let's take a look at writing up this condition. So this is for, and then within the for, this is where we've got our parameters. And just like what we were setting over here, we need to set a value for x. So x is equal to 0. So that's essentially our starting point or our starting number. We have to also make our check to make sure while x, so the condition here, while x is less than 20, then we're going to loop through all these values. And then lastly, we need to have x incrementing in order to have actually something happening and where we can break out of that loop eventually. So let's take a look at this now in the console log. So we can also include all of this stuff that we had earlier. And we need to also set a value for a. So let's take a look and see what our output is. So refreshing it, we've got that exact same output. And let's actually take this one step further and bring together the arrays. So actually I've redeclared a there. So let's see what we can do with a. So we noticed that with the arrays that we're actually able to output, get a length value. So it holds that length object. So a length. And this, so we're starting at 0 while x is less than the length of a, and we're going to increment x. So now we can get rid of some of this stuff here, and we can output it within this type of format. So ax. So x is going to represent the index number within the array. We're going to increment it till we hit the end of the array, and then we're going to stop that loop. So how do you think that this is going to work out? And if you said we're going to list out all the different items in the array according to the index, you are correct. So this is our way to loop through all the different items in the array and see actually what's in the array. And of course you can use for loops for pretty much anything. The same purposes as down here, where if you want to have looping through series of values, executing some code and returning back some of those values and initiating that code. But what happens when you want to output the values of an object? So we saw how we can easily output arrays, but the objects work differently because these values here, these are named values here. So we have to actually identify this property before we can actually get the value that's attached to it. So these paired values, and it's just not going to work within this type of format because we're not able to loop through them easily. So we've got actually another solution within JavaScript in order to do that, and it's actually a lot more straightforward and simple than what we're looking at for even the arrays. So we can take a look, and we've got all of these values in B. So we can set a value of x and place it from what we're returning in B. And now we can use console log, and we can console log out B. And so x essentially is going to hold the key value, the index value. So we can also console log out x so that we can get a better idea of exactly what's happening here. Because although this looks very similar to what's happening over here, let's check this out first in our browser and see if it actually works and see what's being returned here. So we do see that, so the first part here, this was that array. The second part here, so we've got FIR1, SEC1, 2, and THI, and 3. So we see that we're getting those paired values. We're getting the actual, first we're getting the actual key value, the index value of x, and it's being held in B. And when we're calling B with the object key of x, then we're able to return back the value that's associated with it. And essentially, this is the way that we can loop through objects, and it does look the same as what we're doing in the arrays, but it is different, and the concept here is different because we're returning back these key values and utilizing those to return back that object information from the paired values as we normally would do. And this is another good example of why we have different ways of returning back object information so that we can actually return back them as dynamic values, whereas if we set something like, if we were just calling for a value in B, we could console log out a value from B, and we could say something like B and then with the paired value like this, and we could return those back. So this is one way of doing it, and then the other way, of course, was with the brackets, and we could call it over to the key value there, and this is essentially what the same thing that's happening within this for x in B loop here. So these concepts, these loops, this is definitely something that it takes a little bit of time to get the hang of, but once you do, you're going to find it's an essential part of building out your JavaScript logic, and it becomes really, really useful, especially when you're dealing with objects and arrays. And we saw earlier how much power an array and an object has, where we can contain these multiple values within them.